Last night, I caught my neighbor staring at me through the window. But then, just as I was almost at the window, her grandson burst into the room, laughing, holding up a drawing in front of her, shouting excitedly. He was too young to understand the gravity of what was happening. But Mrs. Hargrove didn't blink. She didn't even seem to notice the child. Instead, her hands moved slowly, reaching up and gripping his head. She twisted it, forcing him to face the window. When he saw me, his eyes went wide just like hers, and then he pointed at me. He was still, unnervingly still, his body going limp like a ragdoll. His eyes twitched, but he couldn't look away. I tried to gesture to him, mouthing, "Do you need help?" but he didn't respond. His head tilted sideways, a vacant expression on his face, eyes still locked on me. The weight of the moment was suffocating. Something was horribly wrong. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think straight. I didn't know what I was dealing with, but I knew I had to get away. I stumbled backward, my mind in overdrive, searching for some rational explanation. My fingers fumbled for the blinds, but they were nowhere to be found. Panicking, I sprinted for the other room, slamming the door shut behind me. I had to shut the world out, keep whatever this was at bay, but the relief was short-lived. As soon as I turned around, I saw them, my other neighbors, standing outside, Mr. and Mrs. Stevens, two perfectly normal people, except now their faces were anything but. Mrs. Stevens stood rigid, her lips stretched tight in what looked like some kind of silent scream. She was muttering, but the words didn't make sense, just a low, guttural sound, like she was reciting some terrible prayer, but the relief was short-lived. As soon as I turned around, I saw them, my other neighbors, standing outside, Mr. and Mrs. Stevens, two perfectly normal people, except now their faces were anything but. Mrs. Stevens stood rigid, her lips stretched tight in what looked like some kind of silent scream. She was muttering, but the words didn't make sense, just a low, guttural sound, like she was reciting some terrible prayer. And Mr. Stevens, he was standing too close to my window, his expression twisted into pure, unfiltered disgust. His eyes flicked rapidly, like he was twitching uncontrollably. He kept licking his lips, his body shivering in a way that was almost animalistic. Follow for part 3.